October 25, 1944, Commander Richard Hetherington O'Kane stood in the conning tower of USS Tang, watching his own torpedo turn around and head straight back toward his submarine. O'Kane was the most successful submarine commander in American naval history, Naval Academy graduate class of 1934. By October 1944, he had sunk 24 Japanese ships totaling over 93,000 tons across 4 war patrols. He knew submarines. He knew torpedoes. He knew tactics. In the next 60 seconds, his own weapon would sink his boat and kill most of his crew. USS Tang, hull number SS-306, was a Balao-class fleet submarine commissioned in October 1943. She carried 24 torpedoes, a 5-inch deck gun, and a crew of 87 men. She was one of the Navy's newest and most capable submarines, equipped with the latest radar and fire control systems. Over 4 patrols, Tang had become the most lethal American submarine in the Pacific, destroying more enemy tonnage than any other boat in the fleet. This was her 5th war patrol. Tang had departed Pearl Harbor on September 27, 1944, assigned to hunt Japanese shipping in the Formosa Strait between Taiwan and mainland China. It was the most dangerous patrol area in the Pacific, heavily defended, thick with Japanese patrol craft and aircraft. In 3 weeks, Tang had already sunk 10 ships. She had 2 torpedoes left. O'Kane spotted one more convoy. He decided to attack. That decision would destroy his submarine and kill 78 of his 87 men. By October 1944, American submarines were winning the Pacific War. They had sunk over 1,000 Japanese merchant ships, cutting Japan off from the raw materials needed to sustain the war effort. Oil from the Dutch East Indies, rubber from Malaya, rice from Indochina, all had to be shipped to Japan by sea. American submarines were destroying those convoys faster than Japan could replace them. The Japanese economy was collapsing. The war machine was grinding to a halt. But submarine warfare was deadly for both sides. By October 1944, the United States had lost 45 submarines to enemy action, mechanical failure, and accidents. Over 3,500 American submariners had died. The casualty rate was the highest of any branch of the military. Approximately 22% of all submariners who deployed never came home. Submarine duty was volunteer only. Men knew the risks. They went anyway. USS Tang was commissioned on October 15, 1943, at Mare Island Naval Shipyard in California. She was commanded from the start by Richard O'Kane, who had previously served as executive officer on USS Wahoo under the legendary Commander Dudley "Mush" Morton. O'Kane had learned aggressive tactics from Morton: get close, shoot fast, hit hard, sink everything. When O'Kane took command of Tang, he brought those tactics with him. Tang's first patrol was in the Caroline Islands in January 1944. She sank 5 ships. Her second patrol was in the East China Sea in March and April. She sank 2 more ships and rescued a downed B-29 crew. Her third patrol was in the Yellow Sea in June, where she sank 10 ships in 1 patrol, a record. Her fourth patrol was back to the Yellow Sea in August, where she sank 7 more ships. By September 1944, Tang had sunk 24 ships and damaged several others. O'Kane was awarded 3 Navy Crosses. His crew was considered the best in the submarine force. The 5th patrol was supposed to be different. O'Kane requested assignment to the Formosa Strait, one of the most heavily defended areas in the Pacific. Japanese convoys moving between China and Japan had to pass through the strait. It was narrow, shallow, and packed with patrol boats, destroyers, and aircraft. Most submarine commanders avoided it. O'Kane wanted to hunt there specifically because it was dangerous. That's where the targets were. USS Tang departed Pearl Harbor on September 27, 1944. The crew was experienced. Most had been together since the boat was commissioned. They knew each other. They knew the boat. They trusted O'Kane completely. He had brought them through 4 patrols without losing a single man to enemy action. They believed he could do it again. The patrol orders were straightforward. Proceed to the Formosa Strait, conduct unrestricted submarine warfare against Japanese shipping, avoid detection, sink everything. Tang carried a full load of 24 Mark 18 electric torpedoes. The Mark 18 was a newer weapon, copied from captured German electric torpedoes. Unlike the older Mark 14 steam torpedoes, the Mark 18 left no wake, making it nearly impossible for enemy ships to detect the torpedo's approach. The weapon had a top speed of 29 knots and a range of 4,000 yards. It was reliable most of the time. Tang reached the Formosa Strait on October 10th and began hunting immediately. Over the next 2 weeks, O'Kane attacked convoy after convoy with devastating effectiveness. On October 10th, Tang sank a 7,000-ton tanker. On October 11th, she sank 2 freighters. On October 23rd, she attacked a heavily escorted convoy and sank 3 cargo ships and damaged 2 more, despite aggressive depth charge attacks from Japanese destroyers. By the evening of October 24th, Tang had fired 22 of her 24 torpedoes. She had sunk 9 confirmed ships. O'Kane had 2 torpedoes remaining. Standard procedure would be to save those weapons for the transit home, in case Tang encountered targets of opportunity. But O'Kane's radar detected another convoy heading south through the strait. Large convoy, multiple cargo ships, heavy escort. One more attack, O'Kane decided. Use the last 2 torpedoes, then head for home. At 20 hours on October 24, 1944, Tang's radar detected a convoy of approximately 10 ships escorted by at least 4 destroyers. The convoy was hugging the coast of China, staying in shallow water where submarines would have difficulty operating. Range, 15,000 yards. Course, south. Speed, 10 knots. Perfect target. O'Kane ordered Tang to close to attack position. The submarine approached on the surface, at full speed, using darkness for concealment. By 23 hours, Tang was in position ahead of the convoy, lying in wait like a predator. The plan was simple. Wait until the convoy came within 1,000 yards, fire both remaining torpedoes at the 2 largest ships, then dive deep and escape before the escorts could counterattack. At 23:30 hours, the convoy entered attack range. O'Kane identified the targets, 2 large cargo ships, each approximately 10,000 tons, loaded deep with supplies. The escorts were positioned on the convoy's seaward side, protecting against attack from the open ocean. They were not watching the landward side as carefully. Tang was between the convoy and the Chinese coast. The escorts weren't expecting a submarine there. O'Kane gave the order. Torpedo tube number 23, fire. The Mark 18 electric torpedo launched smoothly, running straight and true toward the lead cargo ship. Range, 900 yards. Running time, approximately 50 seconds. O'Kane watched through the periscope. The torpedo's track was invisible, no wake from the electric motor. The Japanese had no warning. At 23:31 hours and 50 seconds, the torpedo struck the lead cargo ship amidships. The explosion was massive, a column of fire rising hundreds of feet into the air. The ship's back broke. She began sinking immediately. O'Kane shifted his periscope to the second target. The cargo ship was turning, trying to evade, but she was too slow and too close. At 23:32 hours, O'Kane ordered the final torpedo fired. Tube number 24, fire. The last Mark 18 launched and began its run toward the second cargo ship. Range 1,100 yards. Running time approximately 60 seconds. O'Kane kept the periscope up to observe the hit. The crew in the conning tower waited. 50 seconds passed. The torpedo should be hitting any moment. Then someone in the conning tower shouted, "Torpedo running erratic." O'Kane swung the periscope around. The torpedo was broaching, breaking the surface, diving, then surfacing again. The weapon's depth control had failed. Worse, the torpedo was turning. It was no longer heading toward the target. It was curving in a wide arc to the left. It was turning back toward Tang. O'Kane immediately ordered emergency full speed ahead. Tang's diesel engines roared to full power. The submarine began accelerating, trying to outrun the torpedo. But electric torpedoes ran at 29 knots. Tang's maximum surface speed was 20 knots. The math was brutal. The torpedo was faster. O'Kane ordered hard right rudder, trying to turn the boat to present a smaller target. Tang heeled into the turn. Men grabbed handholds as the deck tilted. The torpedo kept coming, tracking in a wide circle, now heading directly at Tang's stern. Range 500 yards and closing. "Clear the bridge! Dive! Dive!" O'Kane shouted the orders, even though he knew it was too late. A submarine needed at least 60 seconds to dive safely. The torpedo would hit in less than 20 seconds, but training took over. The lookouts and bridge crew scrambled down the ladder into the conning tower. O'Kane stayed on the bridge, watching the torpedo, hoping it would miss. At 23:33 hours, the torpedo struck USS Tang in the stern, aft of the maneuvering room. The explosion blew a massive hole in the pressure hull. The stern filled with water instantly. 8 men in the maneuvering room and after torpedo room died immediately, drowned before they could even react. The submarine's stern sank rapidly. The bow rose out of the water at a steep angle. O'Kane was thrown from the bridge by the force of the explosion. He hit the water 50 feet from the boat. When he surfaced, he saw Tang's bow rising higher and higher, nearly vertical, silhouetted against the burning cargo ship in the background. Men were jumping from the deck, abandoning ship. The submarine hung there for maybe 10 seconds, bow pointing at the sky, stern already on the bottom in 180 feet of water. Then she slid backward and disappeared. USS Tang sank in less than 60 seconds after the torpedo impact. Of the 87 men aboard, approximately 30 made it off the boat before she went under. The rest were trapped inside. Commander O'Kane surfaced in a patch of burning oil. The cargo ship Tang had torpedoed was on fire, spreading fuel across the water. O'Kane swam away from the flames, gasping for breath, searching for other survivors. He could hear men shouting in the darkness. Some were swimming, some were already drowning, some were screaming. The Japanese escorts had seen Tang's torpedo track as it circled back. They had watched the submarine sink. Now they were converging on the position, searchlights sweeping the water, looking for survivors, not to rescue them, but to kill them. Japanese doctrine in 1944 was clear. Enemy submariners were not given quarter. They would be machine-gunned in the water or left to drown. A destroyer approached, spotlight blazing. O'Kane dove underwater, holding his breath, trying to hide. The destroyer passed directly overhead. O'Kane could hear the screws churning. When he surfaced, the destroyer was circling back. Other survivors were caught in the spotlight. Machine gun fire raked the water. Men screamed and died. O'Kane found a piece of wreckage, a wooden hatch cover from Tang, and clung to it, trying to stay afloat. His lungs burned. His body was bruised from the explosion. He had swallowed oil and seawater. He was vomiting and coughing, barely conscious, but alive. He could see other survivors scattered across the water, maybe 10 or 15 men, trying to stay afloat while Japanese destroyers hunted them. At 03 solid hours, a Japanese patrol boat approached slowly, searchlight playing across the debris field. O'Kane expected to be shot. Instead, sailors threw lines into the water. They were taking survivors prisoner. O'Kane grabbed a line and was hauled aboard. He collapsed on the deck, unable to stand. Japanese sailors kicked him, shouting in a language he didn't understand, then dragged him below and threw him into a small compartment already crowded with other Tang survivors. By dawn on October 25th, the Japanese had recovered 9 survivors from the water. Commander Richard O'Kane, Lieutenant Lawrence Savadkin, the engineering officer, Chief Torpedo Man's mate Floyd Caverly, motor machinist's mate Hayes Trucca, electrician's mate Clayton Decker, Seaman Bill Liebold, Seaman Jesse De Silva, fireman John Fluker, Torpedo Man's mate Pete Narawansky, 9 men out of 87. The other 78 were dead, drowned inside the submarine, or killed in the water by Japanese machine guns or exposure. The 9 survivors were transferred to a larger Japanese destroyer, then taken to Formosa, interrogated, beaten, and eventually moved to prisoner of war camps. They would spend the next 10 months in brutal captivity, not knowing if America was winning or losing the war, not knowing if they would survive to see liberation. What the survivors in the water didn't know was that men were still alive inside USS Tang. 13 men had survived the initial sinking. They were trapped in the forward torpedo room, the only compartment that was still airtight and not flooded. The stern was completely gone. The engine rooms were flooded. The control room was crushed, but the forward torpedo room, the strongest part of the submarine, had held. Lieutenant Commander O'Kane's executive officer, Lieutenant Richard Croth, was the senior officer in the forward torpedo room. With him were 12 enlisted men, torpedomen, electricians, gunners, sailors. They were alive but trapped in complete darkness 180 feet below the surface, with no power, no light, and no way to communicate with the surface. The compartment was small, maybe 20 feet long and 10 feet wide, packed with torpedo loading equipment and machinery. 13 men crowded together in pitch blackness, breathing air that was already growing stale. They could hear water leaking in through damaged fittings, a slow drip that would eventually flood the compartment. They knew they were going to die. The only question was how long they had. One of the men found an emergency battle lantern. The weak beam illuminated a nightmare scene. The compartment was tilted at a steep angle, bow down. Everything loose had fallen to the forward bulkhead. Men were tangled together, some injured, all terrified. The air was thick with the smell of oil, sweat, and fear. Lieutenant Croth took charge. He ordered the men to check for injuries. 2 men had broken bones from being thrown around during the sinking. Several had cuts and bruises. Everyone was in shock. Croth told them to stay calm, conserve air, and wait for rescue. He didn't believe rescue was coming, but he had to give them hope. Someone found the submarine's escape trunk, a small chamber designed to allow men to exit a sunken submarine using special breathing apparatus. Tang carried Momsen lungs, individual escape devices that recycled exhaled air and allowed a man to ascend slowly from depth. The system worked in theory. In practice, very few submariners had ever successfully escaped from a sunken boat. The depth was the problem. Tang was in 180 feet of water. The Momsen lung was rated for 100 feet maximum. Deeper than that, the pressure could rupture lungs, cause embolism, or bend the nitrogen in a man's blood, leading to decompression sickness. The ascent had to be slow, controlled, and calm. Men had to exhale continuously to prevent lung rupture as the air expanded during ascent. Panic meant death. Croth made the decision. They would attempt escape. Staying in the submarine meant drowning when the air ran out or when the leaking water finally flooded the compartment. Escaping meant maybe a 50% chance of survival. Those were better odds. The men drew straws to determine escape order. 4 men would go at a time, the maximum the escape trunk could handle. The first group entered the trunk at approximately 04 hours. They sealed the lower hatch, flooded the chamber, equalized pressure, opened the upper hatch, and swam for the surface. 3 made it. The 4th panicked halfway up, held his breath, and died from pulmonary embolism when his lungs ruptured. The second group went up at 04:30. 2 made it. 1 was too badly injured to swim and drowned 50 feet from the surface. 1 held his breath and died from embolism just like the first casualty. The third group went up at 05:00 Sara. All 4 made it to the surface alive, but Japanese destroyers were still patrolling overhead. Machine gun fire killed 2 of them within minutes. The other 2 were captured. By 05:30, only 5 men remained inside the submarine: Lieutenant Croth and 4 enlisted men. The air was nearly gone. Carbon dioxide levels were rising. The men were gasping, dizzy, losing consciousness. They had to go now or die where they sat. The final group entered the escape trunk. Croth was last. He sealed the lower hatch, knowing he would never see the forward torpedo room again. The trunk flooded. Pressure equalized. They opened the upper hatch and swam upward through black water toward a surface they couldn't see. 8 men successfully escaped from USS Tang's forward torpedo room. 5 died during the ascent from lung rupture or drowning. 3 made it to the surface alive but were killed by Japanese machine gun fire or drowned from exhaustion and injuries. Lieutenant Croth was the only officer who escaped. He reached the surface, gasped air, and immediately came under machine gun fire from a Japanese patrol boat. He dove, swam underwater as long as he could, surfaced in the middle of burning oil, and somehow survived until dawn when he was captured. The final count was brutal. Of 87 men aboard USS Tang when she sank, only 9 survived to be taken prisoner. 5 officers, Commander O'Kane, Lieutenant Savadkin, Lieutenant Croth, and 2 junior officers. 4 enlisted men, Caverly, Decker, Leibold, and De Silva. 78 men died, either trapped inside the submarine, killed during escape attempts, or shot in the water by Japanese forces. The 9 prisoners were taken to Formosa, interrogated, beaten, and moved to prisoner of war camps in Japan. They were held at Ofuna Interrogation Center, where they were tortured for military information. They were starved, denied medical care, and subjected to psychological torment. The Japanese knew they were Tang's crew. They knew Tang had sunk multiple ships. They wanted revenge. In December 1944, the 9 Tang survivors were moved to a Mori POW camp near Tokyo. Conditions were horrific: starvation rations, no heat in winter, forced labor, regular beatings. Men died daily from disease, malnutrition, and abuse. The Tang survivors somehow held on. They had survived the sinking. They would survive captivity. On August 15, 1945, Japan surrendered. American forces liberated Omori Camp on August 29th. The 9 Tang survivors had been prisoners for 10 months. They were emaciated, sick, and traumatized. O'Kane weighed 88 pounds, down from his normal 160. Savadkin couldn't walk. Several had permanent injuries from torture and malnutrition, but they were alive. After liberation, the Navy conducted an extensive investigation into the loss of USS Tang. Commander O'Kane and the other survivors were debriefed in detail. The story they told was shocking. Tang had been sunk by her own torpedo due to a mechanical malfunction. The investigation focused on the Mark 18 electric torpedo. Examination of records showed that circular runs, torpedoes that turned back toward the firing submarine, were a known problem with early Mark 18 weapons. The torpedo's guidance system used a gyroscope to maintain course. If the gyro malfunctioned, or if the torpedo's steering planes jammed, the weapon could veer off course and circle back. Tang's final torpedo, number 24, had exhibited exactly that failure. The torpedo had been fired correctly. Initial guidance was good. Then, approximately 20 seconds into the run, the torpedo broached, indicating a depth control failure, and began turning in a wide arc to port. The torpedo completed a nearly 270-degree turn and struck Tang in the stern. The Navy's Bureau of Ordnance had known about the circular run problem since 1943, but had been slow to fix it. Several submarines had reported close calls with erratic torpedoes. At least 2 other submarines, USS Tullabee and USS Tang, were believed to have been sunk by their own circular running torpedoes, though Tang was the only confirmed case with survivors to verify what happened. The investigation concluded that USS Tang was lost due to torpedo malfunction, not crew error. Commander O'Kane and his crew had performed flawlessly. The weapon had failed. The Navy accepted responsibility and awarded O'Kane the Medal of Honor for his actions during Tang's 5 war patrols. He was the only submarine commander to receive the Medal of Honor and survive the war. The investigation also led to immediate changes in torpedo testing and deployment procedures. All Mark 18 torpedoes were recalled and their guidance systems inspected. Modifications were made to prevent steering failures. Submarines were instructed to fire torpedoes only at ranges exceeding 1,000 yards to give time to evade if a circular run occurred. These changes came too late for Tang, but may have saved other submarines from similar fates. Commander Richard Hetherington O'Kane was born in 1911 in Dover, New Hampshire. He graduated from the Naval Academy in 1934 and served on surface ships before transferring to the submarine service in 1938. By 1942, he was executive officer on USS Wahoo under Commander Dudley Morton, widely considered the most aggressive submarine commander in the Pacific. O'Kane learned from Morton: get close to targets, shoot fast, shoot often, sink everything. When O'Kane took command of Tang in 1943, he applied those lessons with devastating effectiveness. Over 5 war patrols, Tang sank 24 Japanese ships totaling 93,124 tons, more than any other American submarine commander. O'Kane received 3 Navy Crosses and the Medal of Honor. But O'Kane's greatest achievement wasn't the ships he sank. It was the men he brought home. Through 4 complete war patrols, O'Kane never lost a single crewman to enemy action. His men trusted him completely because he always got them back. On the 5th patrol, that record ended in the worst possible way, through a weapon malfunction that O'Kane could not prevent or control. After the war, O'Kane remained in the Navy, eventually rising to the rank of Rear Admiral. He commanded submarine divisions, taught at the Naval War College, and mentored a new generation of submarine officers. He retired in 1957 after 23 years of service. He wrote 2 books about his experiences, Clear the Bridge, published in 1977, and Wahoo, published in 1987. Both became required reading for submarine officers. O'Kane never fully recovered from the trauma of losing 78 men. In interviews late in life, he spoke about Tang's final patrol with visible pain. He remembered every man who died. He carried their names with him. He believed that if he had fired the final torpedo from slightly longer range, or if he had checked the weapon more carefully, or if he had just headed home with 2 torpedoes remaining instead of attacking 1 more convoy, those men would have lived. The survivors struggled with guilt for decades. Why did they survive when 78 others died? Lieutenant Savadkin dealt with severe PTSD and nightmares for the rest of his life. Chief Caverly rarely spoke about the experience. Several survivors refused to discuss Tang at all, the memories too painful. O'Kane himself admitted that he dreamed about the sinking regularly, always watching helplessly as his own torpedo turned back toward his boat. Richard O'Kane died in 1994 at the age of 83. He was buried at Arlington National Cemetery with full military honors. Former submarine commanders attended. The Yamboa ceremony included a Navy Honor Guard and a submarine memorial service. O'Kane was remembered not just as the most successful submarine commander in American history, but as a leader who cared deeply about his men and carried the burden of their loss until his final day. The 8 other Tang survivors returned to civilian life after the war with varying degrees of success. Most never fully escaped the trauma of that night. Lieutenant Lawrence Savadkin, the engineering officer, suffered from severe PTSD. He left the Navy immediately after the war and struggled to maintain employment. He died in 1973 at age 53 from heart failure, which friends attributed to stress and trauma from his wartime experiences. Lieutenant Richard Croth, who organized the escape from the forward torpedo room, stayed in the Navy for several more years but left in 1950. He worked as an engineer and lived quietly in California. He rarely discussed Tang until late in life when he agreed to a few interviews. He died in 1994, the same year as O'Kane. Chief Torpedoman's mate Floyd Caverly returned to his home in Massachusetts and worked in a shipyard. He attended Tang reunions but never spoke publicly about the sinking. He died in 1987. Electrician's mate Clayton Decker became an electrician in civilian life and lived in Pennsylvania. He was the most willing of the survivors to discuss Tang's final patrol and gave several interviews to naval historians. He died in 2009 at age 87. Seaman Bill Liebold returned to his home in Ohio and worked in manufacturing. He maintained contact with other survivors and attended submarine veteran events. He died in 2000. The other survivors, De Silva, Fluker, Trucca, and Narawansky, returned to civilian life and deliberately avoided publicity. Very little is known about their post-war lives. Most refused to discuss Tang with anyone outside their immediate families. Several survivors reported in later interviews that they felt intense guilt about surviving. They believed they should have done something different, should have saved more men, should have died themselves instead of their shipmates. O'Kane repeatedly told them it wasn't their fault. The torpedo malfunction was beyond anyone's control. But guilt doesn't respond to logic. The survivors carried it anyway. USS Tang's wreck remained undiscovered for 45 years. The exact sinking position was uncertain because O'Kane's navigation records went down with the boat. The area where Tang was lost, the Formosa Strait, is politically sensitive, claimed by both mainland China and Taiwan. Salvage operations were impossible during the Cold War. In 1988, a Chinese fishing vessel snagged nets on an underwater obstruction in approximately the right location. The fishermen reported finding a large metal object on the bottom in 180 feet of water. The Chinese government investigated but never publicly confirmed finding Tang's wreck. In 2000, a joint American-Taiwanese research team using side-scan sonar located what they believe is USS Tang, approximately 30 miles northwest of Turnabout Island in the Formosa Strait. The wreck is in 180 feet of water, bow down at a steep angle, stern section completely destroyed. The position matches survivor accounts and Japanese records of where they rescued Tang's crew. No attempt has been made to raise the wreck or recover remains. USS Tang is a war grave protected under international law. The 78 men who died inside the submarine rest there still. The Navy has designated the site as off-limits to salvage or disturbance. Every year on October 25th, submarine veterans gather at various locations around the United States to remember USS Tang and her crew. The ceremony is simple. A bell rings 87 times, once for each man aboard, followed by a moment of silence. It's a tradition that began with Tang's survivors and continues decades after the last of them passed away. The loss of USS Tang taught the Navy several critical lessons about submarine warfare and weapons reliability. First, torpedoes needed better testing. The circular run problem with Mark 18 torpedoes was known but not adequately addressed. After Tang's loss, the Bureau of Ordnance implemented mandatory full-system testing of every torpedo before deployment. Quality control procedures were overhauled. Circular runs became extremely rare in later models. Second, escape training improved dramatically. Tang's forward torpedo room escape showed that Momsen lung escape from 180 feet was possible but extremely dangerous. The Navy developed better escape procedures, improved training, and eventually replaced the Momsen lung with more reliable systems. Modern submarines have escape trunks designed for deeper depths and improved survival rates. Third, submarine doctrine changed regarding final attacks. After Tang, submarine commanders were strongly discouraged from firing their last torpedoes unless absolutely necessary. The risk of weapon malfunction on final shots when the submarine had no remaining weapons for defense was considered too high. Better to return to base with unused torpedoes than to risk the boat on one more attack. Fourth, the Tang incident reinforced the importance of aggressive damage control and crew training. The 13 men who survived long enough to escape from the forward torpedo room did so because Lieutenant Croth maintained order, controlled panic, and executed textbook escape procedures under impossible conditions. That kind of leadership saves lives, but perhaps the most important lesson is simpler and more painful. Sometimes you can do everything right and still lose. Commander O'Kane was the best submarine commander in the Navy. His crew was experienced and well-trained. His tactics were sound. His execution was flawless. The weapon failed. 78 men died. No amount of skill or courage could prevent it. That's the reality of war. Technology fails. Luck runs out. Good people die for reasons beyond anyone's control. USS Tang's final patrol is a reminder that even the best can be brought down by factors they cannot influence or predict. If you found this story meaningful, please subscribe and share this video. We preserve these stories because they matter. They show us that courage is real, that leadership matters, and that even in tragedy, there are lessons worth learning. USS Tang represents something important in naval history. She was the most successful American submarine of World War II. She sank more enemy ships than any other boat. She was commanded by the best submarine officer in the fleet. She had the most experienced crew, and she was destroyed by her own weapon through no fault of her crew. The 78 men who died on USS Tang were sailors doing their jobs. They volunteered for the most dangerous duty in the Navy. They served on a boat that had proven itself repeatedly. They trusted their commander, who had never lost a man. They went into combat one more time because that's what they were trained to do. They died because a torpedo guidance system failed. Their names are inscribed on the submarine memorial at Pearl Harbor. Their sacrifice is honored by submarine veterans every October 25th. Their story is taught at submarine schools as a reminder that mechanical systems can fail and that weapons can malfunction at the worst possible moment. The 9 survivors lived with the memory of that night for the rest of their lives. They watched their submarine sink. They floated in burning oil while Japanese destroyers hunted them. They spent 10 months in brutal captivity, not knowing if they would survive. They came home and tried to rebuild lives that had been shattered by trauma and loss. Commander Richard O'Kane carried the burden of command until his death in 1994. He was the most decorated submarine commander in American history. He received the Medal of Honor, 3 Navy Crosses, and numerous other decorations. He was remembered as a brilliant tactician and a fierce warrior. But he never forgot the 78 men he lost on October 25, 1944. USS Tang proved that even the best submarine with the best crew, commanded by the best officer, could be lost in an instant through no fault of their own. That's not a story about failure. It's a story about the unforgiving nature of war, where split-second mechanical failures can destroy years of training and experience. Visit the Submarine Memorial at Pearl Harbor if you can. Find USS Tang's name among the 52 submarines lost in World War II. Read the names of the 78 men who died that night. Remember them. They served with honor, fought with courage, and died doing their duty. They deserve to be remembered. Thank you for watching. Please comment below and tell us where you're watching from. We appreciate every person who helps keep these stories alive. These men died 80 years ago, but their service and sacrifice should never be forgotten.